recording. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick little, again, overview of things in the UK. Like I said, I do want to encourage you, if possible, to read the chapter first before you go through the initial video from yesterday and this video for today. And then we should have just enough time for me to do it, like a little bit of Iran, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I'm going to first need to screen share. Give me one moment, please. And here we go. All right, so a couple of quick reminders from yesterday. In comparison to the federalist systems that we examined, Russia, Mexico, and that we will look at Nigeria, the UK has a unitary system similar to Iran and China, okay? It is unitary and parliamentary as compared with a presidential system. We went through some of those comparisons yesterday as well. Queen Elizabeth II, who's the head of state, Boris Johnson, head of government. Important part with this in terms of exam is that the UK does not, once again, have a constitution. They have common law, which is the buildup of all the history of past laws, legal documents, and decisions that have been made by courts and parliament over time since the Magna Carta. And that consists of what is referred to as a little c constitution, not a big C constitution. So there's not one unifying document for everything. Okay, this just, again, goes through everything that we, most of what we talked about yesterday, the idea that the Prime Minister is elected. I like to say that the Prime Minister leading the UK is selected by the voters because they vote for seats of the dominant part, who will eventually be the dominant party in Parliament, to then elect from within their ranks another member of Parliament to be the Prime Minister. That's why he is called the first among equals. We'll also draw your attention to some of the powers that the Prime Minister has. Okay, the Prime Minister can call elections. That means the Prime Minister can say, we need to have an extra election, a snap election, like Theresa May did in 2019. It does have to be approved by Parliament. She can't just call elections on her own. Parliament has to give its approval. But again, remember, if Theresa May, or now Boris Johnson, has control of the dominant party in Parliament, and the dominant party in Parliament backs the Prime Minister, they're going to vote to have there be another election. The Prime Minister sets the foreign policy agenda, serves as in-chief and chief executive over the civil service. So that's where the civil service is just the bureaucracy. That is similar to what a president does, okay? Also, the Prime Minister leads formulation of policy, implementation and enforcement, and the removal mechanism, like we talked about yesterday, vote of no confidence, all right? The United Kingdom, again, parliamentary system is bicameral, House of Commons, House of Lords. I added this part here with the House of Lords because it wasn't in the slides yesterday. All right, you might be asked to identify powers that the House of Lords has, or compare upper houses with one another. Okay, Nigeria has a co-equal upper house. Its Senate is co-equal to its House of Representatives. Mexico has a co-equal Chamber of Deputies and Senate. All right, the UK and Russia, we do not have co-equal co-equal chambers within the bicameral system. The Duma has the strength, and in Russia and in the UK, it is the House of Commons. So that means the powers that the House of Lords has is limited. They cannot stop or veto legislation. They only provide a delaying process or an additional input process where they can discuss issues, they can review bills, they may suggest amendments, but they may not pass amendments. That all has to happen in the House of Commons. I'll go over again first past the post voting. Once again, before I kind of let us go, vote of no confidence is how the prime minister is removed. Okay, this goes over exactly what I said a moment ago with the powers of the House of Lords. Okay, also keep in mind, important, House of Lords has very few remaining hereditary peers. Oops. Okay, this is slightly new, and that I didn't have us dive too deeply into the judicial branch. Okay, we focused a lot on Parliament and the Prime Minister, with there being a fused executive where the Prime Minister is actually a member of Parliament. That means Parliament has what is referred to as parliamentary supremacy. Parliament has a majority of the power politically and when it comes to making policy in the UK. The UK does have a separate and independent judiciary. We do have rule of law that is upheld by the judiciary, but we do not have, ding, 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 important, unlike Russia, which has a constitutional court that reviews laws and actions to make sure that they align with Russia's constitution. Unlike Mexico, which has a Supreme Court that has judicial review. Unlike Nigeria's Supreme Court, which has judicial review. Contrast, the UK Supreme Court does not have the same level of judicial review that the other three courts, which are part of a federal system, do. All right. They're a final court of appeals for criminal trials. They address civil rights and human rights issues, civil liberties issues. They rule on, this is key, they rule on devolution disputes. So when those three other nations, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, their parliaments, in Wales it's the Assembly, but when their legislatures have conflict with the Parliament in London, then this kind of gets worked out in the United Kingdom Supreme Court. It was established in 2009. You might remember we went through the timeline of the prime ministers. This is Tony Blair. So it was established by a Labour Party controlled government. All right. They are constantly interpreting precedent and looking at common law. All right. It is viewed as independent, just like the other three judicial branches, even though there is no power of judicial review and no official written constitution. I don't think it would come up on the exam, but just as an aside, one of the things that has been put forward by Boris Johnson and the current Conservative Party in power is removing the UK Supreme Court, dissolving it. One of the reasons being that the purpose behind the UK Supreme Court, especially when it came to civil rights and civil liberties, was to act as a bridge between the EU and the EU's guidelines for civil rights and civil liberties and UK's existing precedent and law. So the first argument is, well, we don't have the EU, we don't really need the Supreme Court. Also, little aside, Boris Johnson had his own conflict with the UK Supreme Court when the UK Supreme Court ruled against him when he attempted to briefly he tried to like stop Parliament from meeting, basically try to figure to close the doors on Parliament to prevent them from discussing a particular issue. And the UK Supreme Court said, no, 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 you can't do that. So he doesn't like them. I put all of the parties together, and there's one page with with an infographic. Again, multi-party system. I think this graphic really shows that, hopefully fairly persuasively. All right, this is from the 2019 election. This is arranged in approximate order of size of party and influence, with the Conservatives, Labour, Liberal Democrats, and the Scottish National Party up here at the top. And then as we go down here to the bottom, we get the smaller and smaller and smaller parties, some of which did not achieve seats at all in the election. And the UK Independence Party actually ceased to exist because they gained no seats. But I take you through the timeline again. It is important with the exam that you know Plaid Cymru, Sinn Féin, Democratic Unionist Party. And the reason that it's important to know and keep in mind the Scottish National Party, Sinn Féin, Plaid Cymru, is that these are national-based political parties. Okay, Scottish National Party, I think, clearly indicates the nationalism of Scotland. Sinn Féin, I put a little note here at the bottom that Sinn Féin does not actually even send its MPs, its members of Parliament, to Parliament because they're protesting what they've used the continued occupation of Northern Ireland by the United Kingdom. And then Plaid Cymru, which is in Wales only, is also a very small part in terms of how many people are in Parliament, but they do make it to Parliament. I very quickly ran through, I put these two up for information about the election process. Here, I don't think you'll see it, but if it does come up, the whole reason that elections happen every 5 years is the Fixed Term of Parliaments Act that was passed in 2011 that said we can have an election every 5 years. These, again, important. These are not term limits. These are electoral limits. All right, so we could look at this as a limitation on the executive within a parliamentary system, because an executive within the parliamentary system could, in theory, be elected indefinitely. All right. Elections were called, this was a snap election. All right. And the snap election that happened in 2019 was once again about Brexit. This graphic, just to clarify why I put this graphic up, all right, it's important to keep in mind that Britain has a first past the post voting system, okay? That means that whoever gets the most votes, even if it's only a plurality of votes, wins. This is showing you first past the post versus an alternative vote proportional system where seats would be allocated based on proportion of the overall national vote. So down at the bottom here you have the kind of a combination of the infographic. All right. The idea being that, or the importance of this being that the Conservative and Labour Party are receiving 42% and 40% of the vote, even though the Conservatives end up forming a majority. It's possible to argue that a proportionate system would be more representative of the actual numbers of votes in the country as a whole. Yesterday, Benicio, you asked about neo-corporatism, right? So I went back and kind of added this in to follow this up with some additional information about neocorporatism. The UK, no longer corporatist, as it was when the Beveridge Plan was very much being focused on under the Labour governments in the 1930s, and then kind of continued through conservative governments up through the 1970s. Britain is viewed as pluralist when it comes to interest groups. All right, interest groups are for the most part tied to class and industry. So class has to do with literally financial class. I give you some of the names of interest groups. I doubt you're going to have to. You should not have to identify the name of an interest group directly, but it could come up in a multiple choice question where you're asked to identify a set of groups as what kind of groups are these, and these are interest groups. If you see like farmers, National Farmers Union, the British Medical Association, again, these are all interest groups that bridge the gap between the government and groups of people, okay? Neocorporatism takes place when interest groups, these are called peak associations. Peak just means that they're the highest groups that are most close to the government, okay, as opposed to a local organization or interest group in your town. Neocorporatism, the difference between corporatism and neocorporatism is that under corporatist systems, the state and actually owns or is involved in some of the means of production. Neocorporatism is about political connections and influence. All right. The term here, and we'll probably have to revisit this again next week when we talk about some of the other interest group systems in other countries, is called quangos. Quango stands for quasi non-governmental organizations. Basically, they were created by Parliament and set up to bring government and government interests and private organizations and corporations' interests closer together. These are a remnant of corporatism. Quangos are being phased out. If it comes up or the concept of quangos come up, you would see it in the context of an interest group based question on the multiple choice section. Here I give you the cleavages, again, that are ethnic cleavages, religious cleavages, demographics with the GDP per capita. I will mention with the demographics, just so you know, comparatively, the United States GDP per capita is about $62,000 a year, whereas the UK now is about $40,000 a year. But it is one of the world's strongest countries based on GDP. Here we have the type of economic system in the UK. Again, this could come up as a multiple choice question. It's a mixed economy that has elements of capitalism with free markets, but when it comes to building roads, schools, hospitals, the universal healthcare system, that is done by the government. And so that economic engagement is not a completely free market. It's not completely capitalist. It is mixed. I have the kind of components of British spending. I want to point out one thing with this, and that is if you look at this, notice we have health, social security, long-term care. All right, so these big categories here are all services that are being provided for people who are older. All right, so the one of the challenges that the UK has is how to support its higher proportion of an elderly population. This is similar to China. This is not the case in Mexico or Iran, by contrast, or Nigeria, which have very young populations, but it is like Russia. Also notice that education receives a fairly large proportion of the UK budget as well. Brexit, I give you some additional information on Brexit so that you have the actual Brexit vote. You could see how it was broken down and how close it was. I give you some information about supranational organizations like the International Monetary Fund or the WTO and how they're connected to the UK. Also NATO, and then the issue of possible Scottish independence. Again, the comparison here would be with Chechnya in Russia, Chiapas in Mexico, Xinjiang province, and the semi-autonomous regions in China. Okay, these kind of cleavages, these nationalist cleavages, are largely suppressed in Iran. And then Nigeria attempts to solve the challenges of these cleavages through their political system structure and their electoral system setup. So there you have kind of an additional overview of all things UK, kind of continuing from yesterday. I want to open it up here for a moment, stop sharing. Are there any questions that Benicio, you or Lynn have right now as I drink my iced coffee? Benicio, you said you're all good. Lynn, you as well?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I'm gonna pause the video for right now and stop recording.